This is what some of the artillery pieces would have looked like for the British forces here. Right here we have a British 6-pound cannon artillery piece, and just take a look though at the positioning. Come closer. Take a look at the positioning of this artillery piece here with this vantage point. And this is what I'm talking about Fort Lignoier, just British forts in general, or colonial forts. This is why it was so impenetrable, and this is why it was so well structured. If you're French and Indian forces, just continent or colonial forces, right, or even French regulars or Indians, to be able to siege this fort, to be able to try to penetrate this fort is going to be insurmountable. Because on every corner, you're going to have an artillery piece to be able to fire down on that corner. Not because everybody thinks that on a fort that you're just going to have artillery pieces on, let's just say, the broadside or the straight angle, but that's not true. You also want to have your artillery pieces angled on the corners, because you don't want your enemy to hide in those, let's just say, hiding places or those corners of the fort. It's actually a really genius idea to put them on the corners of the fort. But here, as you can see, this is also a British 6-pounder, and also we have mortars. And the great thing about mortars is not only could they be placed, I'm not really sure they'd be placed up this far in or this close to the wall, but it could also be pushed all the way back into the interior of the fort. So right here, what we have is a 8-inch mortar, similar to the Cohorn mortar. This bronze mortar throws an exploding shell that is roughly 8 inches. On October 12, 1758, British soldiers fired shells with artillery pieces to drive away the French and native allies' attack. So basically, it's pretty simple, like modern day mortars. Be able just to put that exploding shell into here, boom, and it would just lob this exploding ball or shell out of the fort, and it would angle a little bit. Yeah, not as far distant as a cannon, but this thing would boom, and it would angle, and it would just boom, it would nosedive down. Sometimes the exploding shell would explode up in the sky, or sometimes it would hit the ground and explode. Pretty simple, pretty common sense. But over here, what we have is a 12-pounder. So this is 6 pounds heavier than a 6-pounder. You don't have to be a genius, but this is a heavier, bigger artillery piece. This thing is going to do a lot of damage, okay? And so it says here, the traveling, and remember it says the traveling, which means that this thing can travel. This thing can travel long distances, meaning it can be pushed and pulled by ox, horses. So, like, for example, these just didn't appear here. They didn't teleport here. These were dragged here. That's why they're called traveling 6-pounders, traveling 12-pounders. You know what I mean? So it says right here, referred to as a 12-pounder because it discharges a 12-pound ball. Each fall, Fort Lignoier fires the 12-pound cannon during Fort Lignoier days to commemorate the October 12, 1758 attack on Fort Lignoier. I'm assuming this is the cannon that they fire every Fort Lignoier day. I've never been at a Fort Lignoier day, which yins don't know, but I might keep coming up here to see it. But how cool would this be to see this just awesome field piece fire, boom? Imagine how loud that would be. I mean, I'm already hard of hearing, so I mean, hey, what's the difference? Know what I'm saying? But I'm assuming that this thing is loud and it's powerful. And for many against who were wondering, this is probably used against infantry, but could also be used in a a sieging attack. Could also be used in, let's just say, bigger engagements, meaning like if you drag this to, let's just say you drag this, if the French drag one of these 12-pounders to the outside of the fort, this 12-pounder is going to do some damage. Maybe not to the walls of the fortifications, but lobbing that shell into the fort. I would say a 12-pound ball is going to do some heavy damage to the defenders of this fort. But using it as a defensive weapon, shooting it outside of the fort, well, that's a different story. And if I'm the French and if I'm the Indians sieging this fort, they got to be desperate. They got to be so desperate to siege and get into this place, because you got artillery pieces like this defending it, forget about it. So right now we moved more into the interior of the fort, and right here we have an 8-inch howitzer designed mainly for siege work. A howitzer is a short cannon that can fire an 8-inch exploding shell up to 1 mile away. The bronze barrel features the initials of the Prince of Wales. This thing is impressive, and as it says, it's mainly for siege work. So what I mean for siege work, I mean like if this thing is outside of the fort, it is trying to besiege the fort. It's trying to siege the fort and to be able to break down the defenses. And as you can tell, with this 8-inch barrel, this 8-inch exploding shell, meaning that thing is going to do some heavy damage to the fortifications and to the walls of this fort. But being inside the fort, very impressive. I'm not sure if this would have been placed here, but if it is, good luck to the French and Indians. And this right here is also a traveling 12-pound cannon, like we talked about down there a little bit. Look at the positioning. Just take a closer look at the positioning of this piece right here. Look how it's angled down. Okay, forget about it. Like if you're the French and the Indians and you break into the fort, let's just say you even get into the fort, you try to get into the entrance right there, and look how it's pointing at the entrance, at the main gate or the main entrance of the fort. That is what's a key about this piece, is it's pointing to the entrance of the fort. Why? Because if the enemy breaks into the entrance of the fort, I'm assuming that with this higher elevation, this piece being on higher elevation, common sense tells you that whoever comes through that gate is going to get blasted. And that is why they would put this, let's just say, traveling 12-pound gun here, because what they would want is they would want an extra line of defense. But as you can see, we have a door there. So going further into the fortification, you have the buildings back there, but they have a door here to be able to shut the door. So let's just say that first line of defense, that first wall, that perimeter, if that gets breached, if the enemy gets into that first line of defense, I'm assuming that the infantry or the artillery is going to rush through that gate, stage here, to be able to have a second line of defense just in case the enemy breaches, which was very possible. Maybe not the Battle of Fort Lignoier, but a bigger battle, bigger forces. Let's just say a couple thousand men. Yeah, you're going to have many lines of defense just in case this fort is breached, which is very possible, and it happened many times over the course of human history, without a doubt. And right here, we have a 5.5-inch howitzer. And I'm assuming the word howitzer means being pretty moderate in my German language skills. This is a German piece, meaning this was invented by the Germans, and naturally other countries like Great Britain would have bought it and then made it for themselves. But it says here, combining the features of a mortar and a cannon, the size howitzer has large wheels, a short tail, and discharges a 5.5-inch exploding shell. The cast bronze barrel bears the initials of Field Marshal John Lignoier. That's awesome. So I think it's super cool that this thing, the shortness of this howitzer, this thing is going to do a lot of damage. I mean, the howitzers in general, being besieged weapons or being siege weapons, or guns, they are going to be able to inflict a lot of damage, like I said, on the walls and the fortifications of a fortress like this. But anyway, we're going to go further into the fort and show you more of the housing and the residencies of the civilians or the military personnel. Hey guys, so right now I'm in the barracks, and Fort Lignoier currently interprets this building as living quarters for soldiers, as the number of 5,000 soldiers quartered on site dwindled. They were able to move from tents in the field to repurposed storehouses like this structure. While no maps show a barracks at this location, archaeologists discovered an ash pit which could indicate the presence of a fireplace. So this right here is an interpretation of what the barracks would have looked like, where the soldiers would have resided and slept when they were serving here at Fort Lignoier. So right now we have a fireplace in the middle of the structure, and a fireplace, for many again that might realize, it's pretty common sense, this was essential not only for heat but also for cooking. The soldiers would use a fireplace to stay warm in the winter, but also to cook and make food. And well, not all the time, but I mean sometimes it would be. But this right here is what the bunks would have looked like that the soldiers would have slept in during their stay here at Fort Lignoier. And it's really cool because, as you can see, the structures are pretty small, but they don't have a problem with packing in as many soldiers as possible into the barracks. So I'm assuming it's one man per bed, but sometimes you never know. They could probably pack 2 guys per bed based on the lack of bedding in the barracks. Come over to this side. So right here you have another fireplace here, more than likely for these guys that were sleeping over on this side. So like I was saying to my brother here, I was telling him that if the fort was being besieged, or if the enemy was outside of the walls attacking the fort, the men would jump out of their bunks and they would run over to the muskets, grab the muskets off the wall, and run out of the door to be able to fight off the attackers outside of the walls of the fort. And that probably happened many times, not only here at Fort Lignoier, but also probably in many forts in the British colonies during the French and Indian War. But it's really cool to see. And also right here this is probably where the soldiers would make their cartridges for these muskets. Cartridges meaning that you would pack gunpowder into these cartridges to be able to pour them into the muskets and into the pan to be able to fire the muskets. The soldiers would be able to organize and make these probably at a table, a designated table inside the barracks, probably in the evening or night when they had nothing else really to do because it was pitch black outside. But this is a really cool interpretation of what the barracks would have looked like inside a fort like Fort Lignoier in 1758 to 1766.